Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh. Good Lord. Technology and me, I'm telling you, I'm the opposite of Magneto. If there's an electronic thing in my path or a tool, a power tool, I just have to look at it and it will break.
That's why you're the actor and I'm the engineer. It's okay. If both of us were actors, this would never happen. Like, we would just not have a podcast. And if both of us were engineers, we would have the world's most boring podcast.
Well, that's on you to criticize your people or to make an observation, not a criticism.
There you go.
Anyway, let's talk about this movie.
Well, do you want to talk about the movie or do you want to talk about nominations first? Because they just
Yeah,
came
we
out.
can do that.
There's actually a lot of kind of historic stuff that's gone on this year.
Yeah.
So I think it's worth at least a mention. First and foremost, Chloe Zhao becoming the first woman of color to be nominated for director. I mean, that's pretty huge. And at the same time, this is the first time two women have been nominated as directors in the same year. So, and only, I think they're like number 6 and number 7 total in all of history. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. On top of that, you got Steven Yeun, the first Asian American nominated for Best Actor. Riz Ahmed's the first Muslim nominated for Best Actor. Viola Davis is the most nominated Black actress in history with 4 nominations. Anthony Hopkins is the oldest at 83. I didn't even know that. I assumed it was like Peter O'Toole was older than him or something. But yeah, 83. I mean, he looks pretty good for 83. Christina Oh is the first Asian American woman to be nominated for Best Picture. She was a producer on Minari, and Judas and the Black Messiah is the first movie that has been produced solely by African Americans to earn a Best Picture nomination.
First Korean nominated for Best Supporting Actress. 3 Black men being nominated for Best Supporting Actor. There's a person of color in every acting category. It was what we've talked about. When somebody produces movies, it doesn't necessarily mean, although it should, that diverse amount of people will be nominated, but this gives people an opportunity to see films where people who haven't been seen before. And once you make them, because we talked about this 3 or 4 years ago when #SoWhite came up, I said, we don't need to worry about the nominations. We need to worry about the money being given to the producers to make these movies, and then the nominations will come. So once again, that makes me right. And I'm just happy. I'm just happy because when Lee Isaac Chung goes into a place to get finance for his next film, it means nothing to anybody that he's a great American filmmaker. It means something that he won the Golden Globe and now is an Oscar nominee, and his film is a multiple Oscar nominee. So that's what counts. So he'll walk in and they'll be like, who? Minari? What's that? What? Yeah, I heard about that. Oh, it was nominated for Oscars, and it probably will win, I think, at least one, but we'll wait for that. All it has to do is put that little gold statue on your poster and people listen. So if he needs a certain amount of money for his next film, he's taken more seriously. That's what's important about it. Now, since days have gone by since the nominations, the muck is coming up from the mud and is surfacing, and people are like, in 93 years, only 7 women have been nominated. They get no credit for that. I understand that cynicism. I understand that. But let's take a week or 2, even a month, or let's wait till after the Oscars. Let's celebrate that, statistically speaking, there has never been 2 women being nominated for 2 superb movies.
Yeah, these are not token trophies being given or token nominations being given. These are great movies. And these are women who were given the opportunity, in both of their cases, Emerald Fennell and Chloe Zhao, given the opportunities to make their movies. And they rose to the occasion. They rose to the challenge and made great films that do deserve to be championed, whether they're made by females or not. Now, I would argue that Promising Young Woman made by a man might be a little bit different than Promising Young Woman made by a woman, but that can be debated, I guess. But these are films that I think need to be seen and need to be talked about. They should be the beginning and not the end of each of those subjects.
And this is how I feel about it. You could sit here and debate who should have been nominated, but now the nominations are out, so that's who's nominated. Yep. I don't have a discussion of who got snubbed. I don't believe in that term. Mm-hmm. I believe there's only been one person in the history of me watching the Oscars that has been snubbed, and that's Ben Affleck, because I don't understand that one. I don't understand how he could win everything else.
For director.
And it's a fantastic movie. So that to me felt like a snub, but everything else just feels like they didn't get the nomination. They were the 6th person on the list. Mm-hmm. And you could debate, yes, Delroy Lindo deserved to be nominated, but unfortunately he was not. So that's a different discussion. My discussion in the next couple of weeks will be when any cynicism arises, and I understand it. It's a commercial industry, and this is just part of the machine. I get it. I understand the cynicism and the sarcasm, and I understand all of the jaded ideas about the Oscars. But name one performer or one movie that was nominated that doesn't deserve to be talked about in recognition of the highest honor of their profession. Not one of those performers and not one of those movies doesn't deserve Oscar recognition. And then there's a little bit of a controversy with Lakeith Stanfield being nominated in supporting actor category.
Along with Daniel Kaluuya.
Yeah, it's a bit odd. But if you remember, when we talked about that movie, Judas and the Black Messiah, we kind of going back and forth with who is the lead, or is Daniel Kaluuya supporting Lakeith Stanfield's story? But the one thing that we both agreed upon is that Lakeith Stanfield deserves to be recognized for this movie, that he's a standout. And he does those things where he just looks at the camera. Same with Daniel Kaluuya, but there's something special about his performance in this movie. So he was recognized. And so, yes, he is competition. Got it. And they might cancel each other out, but the other two people in line are just as deserving. So it's a win, 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 win. They call it category fraud, where somebody is in the wrong category. Tatum O'Neal is really a lead in Paper Moon, but she won Best Supporting Actress. Anthony Hopkins, by screen time, is really a supporting character, but he won lead actor. Nicole Kidman is a supporting character to everybody else in The Hours, but she won Best Actress. You could go around and around and around. It happens all the time. But let's take a moment to say these guys are nominated and they are being recognized. So when people go to watch Judas and the Black Messiah and they're feeling something empowering from watching that movie, from those performances, when somebody goes, they should have been nominated for the Oscar, the answer is they are. And that's all that matters to me. When I saw his name, I was like, ooh!
And it was the last one too.
Yeah. And then I was on film Twitter and they were like, category fraud. And I was like, wait. Celebrate Lakeith Stanfield's great performance. We can debate it years from now where he should be, but he's an Oscar nominee for a movie he deserves to be an Oscar nominee for. So I'm happy for him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an Academy Award nominated actor now.
Oh yeah.
He deserves to be.
No, yeah. He's made amazing choices from the get-go. And so this is going to hopefully give him that little extra cachet to really be discerning in his choices, even more discerning potentially. So that'll be really interesting to see what he does next. At Least Promising Young Woman got the 4 nominations that I thought that it should. Actually, I thought it should have gotten a screen. Didn't it get a screenplay nomination?
Yes, it did.
So it got all the ones that I thought it should have gotten. It got editing, actor, director, picture, and screenplay. But having it being nominated for editing is actually perfect to me, because I thought that film, that was one big part of that film. The writing and the editing were huge in that. And obviously the directing was very important. And Carey Mulligan, I think people are saying she's going to win. I don't know, but
there's always a surprise nomination. There's always a weird surprise nomination. And we'll get to director in just a second, because the film we're going to talk about tonight falls into that category.
Yeah.
But that happens often. There's a film that's recognized critically everywhere else because Mads Mikkelsen, he's nominated for the BAFTA. And so there's always this like critical movement, and then it doesn't do well at the Oscars, if that's what you want to call it, but the director is nominated.
Yeah.
And so there's always like this weird, like out of nowhere, Laura Dern for Wild. No one expected that nomination. And then all of a sudden there it is. So I'm not counting anything out this year. And as for Carey Mulligan, why not? Why not her?
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody takes it away from Frances McDormand or anybody else in that category, why not her? And socially speaking, how apropos that that's the performance that won Best Actress in 2020, that we need to focus on that performance because of that issue.
Yeah.
I'm good with it.
Yeah. Well, you did bring up this film that we're going to talk about today, Another Round, and it is somewhat unique in that it was nominated for Best Foreign Language Film and Best Director. And I kind of looked into that and I was like, because I knew that it had happened recently, obviously with Parasite, that was the case. Cold War recently too. And those are the two that I remembered. But I was like, that can't have happened more than like a couple times, right? But I looked back and it happened a bunch actually, where and even times where it was just those two. But these guys are in the same company as Federico Fellini for 8.5. He was also nominated for Amarcord. Also, Francois Truffaut for Day for Night. Ingmar Bergman for Cries and Whispers. Gillo Pontecorvo for Battle of Algiers. So like these are heavy hitters, and so Thomas Vinterberg can now be put into that same group with these guys. So do you know much about Thomas Vinterberg? Had you heard of his name before now?
Not a thing.
Okay, so I had heard of him with the Dogma 95 movement in Denmark. Lars von Trier and him actually came up with we always talk about this stuff. You will create obstacles for yourself to bring out new and interesting artistic revelations, and that's exactly what these guys did. Both Danish directors, they came out with a list of 8 or 10 different rules, and a lot of the rules had to do with, if you're going to make a movie, you can't use special lighting, you can't bring in any kind of special props or be on a set. It has to be all shot on location, essentially. But it was kind of a way to have a rigid structure for the making of a film that puts you in a situation where you have to come up with an interesting story. And the thing that is propulsive about the film is not necessarily the bells and whistles, but the interaction between the characters. And so, for example, one of the first films that went along with these slavish rules was called The Celebration. It's pretty much about a family getting together in a house after some sort of tragic thing happens, and then just stuff kind of blows up. The family just kind of like goes back and forth between each other. And I've never seen it, but the description of it kind of reminds me of like Rachel getting married type of a vibe. But the other thing they did is, instead of shooting on film, they shot on digital video back in like 1998 or so. So that's a really cheap way to make a film, but it looks different. And so Cannes and a lot of these other film festivals thought that it was a new and interesting way of going about things. And so that got people kind of interested in it. And I think Lars von Trier made a couple of films in this way before he kind of went off and did his own thing. And obviously he's transitioned more into, well, craziness and also higher budget filmmaking and more mainstream films compared to what Thomas Vinterberg has done. But yeah, so that's where I'd heard of him before. And he's made a few films. Had you heard of The Hunt with Mads Mikkelsen? That was another movie I heard about, hadn't seen, but that got some play a few years ago. But this movie, it was kind of a 1-2 punch of it getting its nominations, and also it just showed up on Hulu, where we were both kind of like, all right, let's take a look at this. So the movie is about a group of teachers that are just kind of feeling like they're in a rut, and they're teaching in this kind of like prep school, high school, prep school in Denmark, and they decide that they're going to put to the test a theory by this psychologist, scientist guy who says that the optimal blood alcohol content for a human is 0.05% blood alcohol content, meaning you have to be kind of drunk or have a little bit of alcohol in you at all times to really be your best person. So they try to test that theory out, and that's what the rest of the film is about. Did you know anything about this movie before we decided to watch it?
Not a thing. Other than, let me see if I can say his name, Mads Mikkelsen. Yay. Other than he was being considered the 5th nominee for Best Actor this year. Gotcha. And that when people were sliding in and out, which went straight down the line, by the way, everybody who was expected to be nominated was nominated. That's a good thing. But since he won the BAFTA, everybody was saying if there is a mix-up, he's going to be the mix-up. But I know this actor, and by the way, this cast has been used by this director many times before in all those movies that you said. And I know we've gone past it, but I do want to mention Ang Lee is one of those directors you were talking about, who was nominated for director. And
Crouching Tiger.
Yep. And that one foreign language film. And a lot of times that's what happens. So the movie we're talking about tonight, Another Round, might be the contender for best foreign language film, because that seems to add up, that if the director is nominated, and a lot of people call him the 5th nominee, the dark horse, but first of all, watch out for the dark horse, because the dark horse has won in the Oscars before. Ang Lee is the only director who came to mind when you talked about that. I was like,
and I didn't even say it.
yeah. And then I looked it up really quick. I was like, let me IMDb this. And then I was like, oh yeah, it is him. But anyway, Thomas Bo Larsen, who's also in Another Round, was in The Hunt, and a couple of other actors, including Mads Mikkelsen, was also in his other projects. So we've talked about directors who use the same actors over and over again. And that seems to be a pattern. I've seen that in my local theater crowd too. You have a working language and it works out. So no, the answer to your question is I didn't know anything about this movie, but when you suggested it, I had already done research because of the nominations coming out, because that was sort of the same moment. You were texting me about what to do for the podcast. And I thought to myself, okay, this sounds just right. It sounds like a movie that could be, and then I watched the trailer and I was like, absolutely, I'm in. It seemed to be fun and lighthearted in times and places of the film, but I knew it was going to take a turn. And I think coming out of the last several films, including the last movie that we saw, Stalker, we've watched a lot of heavy movies and we wanted something a little bit more lighthearted. I'm not sure this movie falls into that category fully, but I think it's the perfect palate cleanser because it is fun and lighthearted and it's humorous in its place, and then it smacks you down and then it lifts you back up. And I think that's exactly what we needed. So I'm glad that you suggested this movie because I'm glad I've seen at least one of the foreign language films that's nominated this year.
So I've listened to a few podcasts talking about Another Round, and they were very specific about not getting spoiled. They were like, do not Google this, just watch it and you will not be disappointed. So I was expecting some sort of huge revelation, crazy twist, insane craziness. And I will be the first to tell anybody who hasn't seen it yet, don't sit there expecting for some sort of like for aliens to come down halfway through the film. That's not what this film is. So there's definitely portions of the film that are impactful. There's definitely, some surprises, but it's not some sort of like sea-changing craziness that's going to be happening on screen. That it's not a Sixth Sense type of a film. So that actually kind of hurt it. It didn't hurt the film for me. It hurt my experiencing the film because I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, and turns out that all the shoes were there the whole time. So that kind of bugged me. So spoilers from now on. It's on Hulu and it's nominated for some Academy Awards. So yeah, here's what I'll say. I think that Thomas Vinterberg should have been recognized over Aaron Sorkin, but
agreed.
I don't know if there's somebody else who should have been recognized over Thomas Vinterberg. So yeah,
that's a whole nother discussion. They're the nominees.
You got Chaka King out there. You've got a couple other people that
Spike Lee.
Spike Lee. Yes. Now
that is a can of worms.
So that's a little bit of a thorny subject, but so yeah, I did want to talk about a couple different things as far as the film is concerned. I think that the shot selection was interesting because there's obviously going to be scenes in here where they're going to be drunk or getting close to drunk, or they're going to be trying to hide that they're drunk or at least have alcohol on board. And they're going to be trying to hide that from the people around them, whether it's family members or schools or things like that. So the way that Vinterberg decided to represent that was close-up shots with wide-angle lenses and with a very shallow depth of field. So you might have not only just Mads Mikkelsen's face is in focus, but just like his cheek is in focus, but his nose isn't in focus, that kind of a thing. So, and it's all handheld during those scenes. And so it gives a sense of just disheveled, you don't know what's going on. And also you don't know what's around you. It's just this weird kind of in that mind frame with the person. And that's kind of traditional when representing drunkenness or whatever. I mean, another thing that he didn't do, which I kind of thought he might have done, was there's a thing called the snorri cam, which you can tie a camera to a person and have it locked onto that person. You've seen it in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Requiem for a Dream. I mean, it happens a lot. Superbad, I think they used it in Superbad. So yeah, there's other ways that you can represent this type of a disorienting feeling. But and I'm kind of glad he didn't do that. But I was wondering if there would be any other ways that he could have represented that on screen. So as far as that's concerned, it was right down the middle. But the other camera movements and scenes seemed fairly traditional to me. So, which coming from a guy who started off his career with all these like experimental crazy things. Oh, one of the rules of the Dogma 95 manifesto that they had was only handheld. So you could not put your camera on a tripod or on a dolly or Steadicam or a crane or whatever. You had to be handheld. So obviously he's not going by those rules in this scenario, but I think he used handheld when he needed to and then locked off shots when he needed to.
That sounds like really good rules for a beginning director. Don't use any of the tricks that we know. These are kind of new things, if you will. I mean, handheld is what? Not that old, right? It's not really that old, is it?
I mean, a lot of French New Wave, Truffaut and Godard, like they would use it a lot, but I don't know about quote unquote Hollywood movies if they would really use handheld at all. But yeah, so maybe in the last like 50 years. So yeah.
We've talked about obstacles, and I think that adds to your obstacle list that you can only film in natural places. I think that's a really good rule, actually. It limits but expands your choices. You can't build a set. You can't do CGI. You can't green screen it. It has to be a natural set. I understand that rule. I understand a lot of the rules. And I think when you're young and you're trying to develop something new in a medium that's been around for a couple of centuries, or a century at least, you're not going to invent anything brand new. You're just reinventing the wheel. So when you limit yourself to certain things and you can't do certain things, I think it adds to how you look at how you're going to shoot something. And as for the shots up close, to me, I mean, you know more about all that technical stuff. It has an emotional feel to it that it feels like when you're drinking in secret that you are that up close with your life. Like, in other words, you think no one's seeing you. You think you're hiding in the bathroom. So that's what it feels like. And, you know, when somebody is, and they're not abusing anything in the beginning of this film, as with most substances in films, you're not abusing them at first, and then it will start to teeter into something else.
Well, there's a lot of bargaining going on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It feels like that. It feels like it's just you and that joint. It's just you and that bottle. It's just you and that needle. I'm not advocating for any of that. I'm saying, talking about movies. So that shot makes sense to me. And I like the fact that when you see his cheek and not his nose in focus, that makes it human to me. It makes it like we're right up on him watching it. And that if it was going to be blurry to your vision, if you were that close to him, then it would be blurry to the camera. So that kind of stuff makes sense to me. And it resonates differently for me emotionally when a director chooses that. I don't necessarily know if he was nominated for Best Director because of some technique that he uses in the film, or some kind of idea, or some kind of out-of-the-box idea. I think he told a really good story in an interesting way. Is it a new and interesting way? Maybe not. But there's a consistency and there's a solid feel to his direction. You know what you're supposed to be looking at when it's in frame. You know what you're supposed to be focused on. And I know I'm jumping ahead at the very last conversation between him and his wife at the dinner, at the restaurant. There's something you're supposed to be focusing on, and we could talk about that later on. And because of the way he shoots it, you're focused on that. And when your mind goes away from that because of the emotional integrity of the scene, he comes back to that by his shot choices. And so he did what he needed to do, in my opinion. He told a solid story that could have been exaggerated in 1,000 different ways, but he ended up tying it up. And I think that's hard to do, because are you ever not on the side of these four guys?
Yeah.
You're 100% behind them. You understand that when the one guy with the 3 kids and the wife and talks about how they pee on us, Nikolai, right? I love that name, by the way. And I love the way it's spelled. When he's like, they pee all over us. You know, I haven't been in my bed with my wife for years, and now they're peeing all over us. So when you see that shot of him sleeping with his son and his son's on his stomach, it's a really sweet shot. And you're like, oh, that's a good father. He let his kid. I don't know how anybody does that, by the way, because kids move all the time. I'd be like, get off me. But you know, they just fell asleep. And then the way he shoots it, it's kind of at an angle. It's kind of down below, and you see the dribble, and then you're thinking, oh, that's why this is happening. And because the camera is down below and it stays there for a couple of seconds after he gets up, and then he reprimands the little boy in that same shot. The camera's in the same place. And I think it makes the audience aware of where they're at, meaning where the audience is at, but it also keeps us a little bit separate, because it's a very voyeuristic scene. The little boy is a little boy.
Yeah.
People his age pee in their bed. That's what happens.
But also, he didn't take him to the bathroom before they decided to lay down for a nap, because his wife asked him, well, did you take him? And he's like, this isn't the time to ask me.
That's the guy who never takes out the trash and then walks through it in the middle of the night because he didn't take out the trash. That's that husband. Yeah. He's just that guy. He could solve his own problems. But my point to that is that the little kid is very vulnerable in that scene. And the father is frustrated and is yelling at him. And that's probably not psychologically the best route to go. But if the camera was above them, if the camera was straight onto them, it would feel voyeuristic. It would feel invasive. And by tilting the camera down a little bit and bringing it down to the ground a little bit closer to the ground than to the actors, you can watch it and understand everything without feeling like, I don't want to invade that little kid's privacy. This is a subject that kids have problems with. So we stand back from it. And I think that's a really great choice. And he does that consistently throughout this movie. And they're solid choices. And he had choices and he stuck to them and they're solid and that's it.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is it's reminding me of a Miles Davis quote, speaking about jazz, is that he said that it's not about the notes that you play, it's about the notes that you don't play. And that's kind of like what you're saying, is that he had the ability to have 3 different setups for that scene, but he decided to keep that camera locked off. And that's what gave you the voyeuristic feeling, is that it's more of like what a security camera would look like, where a security camera is just always the same shot all the time and things happen in front of it and we would be watching it. Whereas if you start off with an establishing shot or like a medium and then you go to a tighter shot and then you go to a shot of the dad and then a shot of the kid. And then, I mean, the camera's all over the place, but going that way, you got a different feel because he decided not to do a bunch of setups for that particular scene. There's other scenes where he does do a lot of setups, especially when the guys are drinking a lot, whether it's around a table or whether it's that scene later on in the film where they decide to do their binge drinking, try to hit maximum BAC. But yeah, those shots are all over the place. And it's the perfect song too. It's that like it's like Sissy Shuffle or whatever, where you've heard that song before. It's been used in certain films, but at the same Sissy Strut, that's what it's called. But yeah, that kind of like funk groove, and these white guys are just trying to get down, So yeah, I know we're kind of bouncing around a lot, but I'm coming around. I see what you're saying, but what I was trying to do is I was trying to evaluate, especially just compared to some of the other films that we've seen, and what does the director impart to this film, and what do the directors of the other films that we've seen this year, what do they impart to those films? And it would be difficult. I mean, I know obviously the way that they do the nominations is that the directors group within the Oscars nominate the director. So that's something right there that like, this is me and you trying to talk something out, whereas the directors, they do this for a living. So that's probably the most critical and the most specific group that you could ask to evaluate something like this. So far be it from me to question them, I guess. But yeah, I was trying to see what the directors were seeing when they watched the movie.
Okay, well, that's 2 different subjects, though. Because if you watch the movie for the choices that the director made, for the storytelling he wanted to come across to you, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. Then I think if you watched it again, then you can evaluate it based on what you think the other 4 nominees did and the merits of their films. And also, I will say this. I think the simplest, safest choice is the hardest one to make. If it's the right choice and it's not this like David Fincher float through the air across the room to see the back of a refrigerator before it explodes.
Don't you
the same with
mouth off about David Fincher.
I admire that shot in Fight Club. I love that shot in Panic Room. And then when you watch the DVDs, you realize that shot actually happens, that there's not as much computer generation in it as we thought, or that I thought. There's a lot in the Fight Club one, by the way.
There is.
But it's very flashy in the best possible way.
Okay.
That is the best choice. No. I would never criticize David Fincher's masterful choices. I'm saying that if that's what this director needed in another room, then he should have done that, but he didn't. So he didn't force that onto the story.
Yeah.
And also the shot with the kid that we were talking about that's locked off, it's not necessarily that it's voyeuristic. And I like the security camera analogy because you're absolutely right. But a security camera keeps you safe. You're usually in another room inside a place watching that. That locked off camera keeps you safe being voyeuristic and you feel sympathy for the kid because you feel safe at that angle.
It's also on his level too.
Yeah, right. And that's probably psychologically why you feel empathy toward that kid. Anyway, the point to that is that I don't think that you can compare the directors while first watching this film. Because if you break that discussion down, how do you compare directors? How do you compare performances? It's like I think Dustin Hoffman or somebody famous said, if everybody was doing Hamlet, then we could compare the performances. But they're all different characters and they're all different performances. So what Thomas Vinterberg did, in my opinion, was the hardest of the bunch so far because, with the exception of Chloe Zhao, she does a lot of simple things. Her simplicity and the way that she just shows you something in the background of a shot in Nomadland, when she shows it's Christmas time, there's just a little Santa lamp in the background. So you know the time frame of when the scene is taking place without making it a big deal. And then later on, there's a few other things peppered in to make you know it's Christmas time, which gives you a time frame. I think Another Round falls into that same category with actually some more inventive shots So for me, I love it when they recognize somebody who just did a really good job for their story, that particular story.
Yeah. And I think that the other thing about that, like I was talking about earlier, is that he didn't take advantage of the low hanging fruit of like, we've got a bunch of drunk people. Let's take the camera and rotate it.
Yeah.
Do a kind of like a curly cue or a kind of like a spiral, or he didn't do any of the stuff that you might expect. And that would be the easiest way to go about representing it. So he found different ways to represent it, whether it be the rapidity of the cutting, especially in that scene where Mads Mikkelsen is pre-gaming before going to school and trying to be at that, whatever it was, 0.1 level or 0.15 or whatever it was level before he even got to school. He didn't even drive to work. You could tell that because he got out of the back of a car, so he took a car service to work. So that's another subtlety, because you see a car pull up and all you see is just kind of like the rear tire of the car and the bottom edge of the door open up and his foot come out and hit the ground, and that's it. But it informs us that he didn't drive to work. And then in that shot, it kind of pulls up, and then you get to see, I think, Nikolai looking at him being like, well, something's going on. That brings up another thing that I noticed, which is part of the writing of the film, which he did also, which I saw a lot of mirrors or kind of pairs in this film, where you have something that you see at the beginning of the film or close to the beginning of the film that pays off near the end of the film. So that scene that we were just talking about, where he's drunk and at work and he's kind of tooling around the teacher's lounge, and he kind of walks in, waltzes in, whoa, hit you, whoa, spin around, gotta get my coffee, okay, spin this, okay, do this. And then he just bang, slams into the wall there. And then who goes over to help him? It's the coach. It's his coach buddy goes over to help him. And he's like, oh, no big deal. Yeah, I got to just fix him up and no big deal. Later on in the film, coach comes in drunk, and who helps him? Mads Mikkelsen. So that kind of stuff is, you see, that's one example of it. The other one's obviously Nikolai gets peed on. And then later on in the film, he pees on the bed. So, and of course his wife's in there, and it's like, whoa, geez, oh my gosh. It's way more pee than you would think it would need to be, but I'm sure that that's realistic, but still.
Have they seen Train Spotting? That's a lot more stuff in that bed. You know what? In the adult pee scene, I don't know how else to describe it, the father, that shot's opposite. It's from above. Yep. It's shot from adult eyes down into the bed. And that's how you get the big, like, that's a lot of pee, dude. But when's the last time you ever peed in the bed? How much would it really be? It needs to be enough for the audience to go, see, that's why you don't yell at a 3-year-old, you 40-year-old somebody. Exactly. Look how much you peed in. And the wife is so funny. She's such a wife. She's so right, though.
She is right.
Yeah, the first time she's like, I got 3 hours of sleep. Are you seriously yelling in the middle of the night? What are you doing? And then this time she's like, really? Again?
Yeah.
And then there's this look on her face like, you caused all of this.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really say much to you about not taking out the trash and you jumping in it. That was my example. And I didn't really say anything about you yelling at our kid in the middle of the night or the middle of the morning, and I only got 3 hours of sleep. I made my peace with that. But now, really? And there's a shot where she looks and then turns around like she's going to walk out, and then she looks back like, dude, you caused all of this. Figure it out. I'm taking the babies. Figure it all out. Yep. And the way that he has to figure it out and stumbles all over himself it's comically sad.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you have to have a certain sense of humor to really dig into the humor of this film. And I don't know what Danish humor is like. I'm not really sure how to like frame this within a culture. I mean, obviously the culture of the students themselves drinking, the fact that the drinking age is 16, and that it's a little bit, people here in America talk about how, well, man, the brains aren't formed until you're 25 years old or whatever the age is. And it's like, wow, man, and there's kids just like throwing them back at 16 years old. But the other thing I noticed was that, especially at that school, and there's a couple of characters, well, one character specifically, you could tell the amount of pressure that those students are under. And so that's one way that they've dealt with the pressure, or thought that they could deal with the pressure, is through drinking, heavy drinking in certain scenes that we see, especially close to the beginning of the film. So that whole culture may be more rampant, or it may be a subsection, or I'm not really sure. I'm not going to like brand a whole nationality with alcoholism just because we watched one movie that talks about alcoholism or the use of alcohol.
Well, I think that's the point of the opening sequence, is to let the audience know that if you don't come from this area, this is socially acceptable and that this is fine. This is what we do for fun. And the wife, actually, that scene that I made reference to a few minutes ago, she makes reference to that later on in that scene. She was like, I don't care whether or not it's socially acceptable. I don't care whether or not blah, 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 blah. She makes reference to the society she lives in being a drinking culture. And I think what that told me was to not stand in judgment of what I see in American movies, Leaving Las Vegas being Nicolas Cage's Academy Award winning film, where he's drunk all the time and deserved to win that Oscar because it's hard to play drunk. And if I haven't already said that, it is hard to play drunk without being a caricature.
Yeah. Don't you try not to play drunk? Isn't that the whole thing?
Sure.
That's what
We'll
I mean.
go with
I've heard
that.
people say that. They're like, try to play somebody who's not trying to be drunk. But
Yeah, that's what you do when you're drunk.
Well,
And
there you
you're
go.
trying to sneak in the house in like that
Yeah.
Nikolai does, trying to go up the stairs and his foot slipped.
that was hilarious when his foot slips and then he takes that second and he's like telling himself to be quiet.
Well, not only that, but then he thinks he's okay and then starts to try to walk back up, but he's already at an angle and he's up against the other side. It's not going to do him any good to be up against the wall. He should be at the railing. He should be holding onto the railing. But for whatever reason, his drunk mind thinks that he can do it. But I think that that's why drinking amongst the kids, or what we consider, well, they are young people, but what we consider kids, you know, because it's 21 here, it's 18 other places, it's 16 there, that's socially acceptable for them to have a marathon running around their lake on a Saturday morning where they have to drink a case of beer. And if you throw up, you have to drink another beer. I mean, I would never survive in that society. I just could not do it. But I think it was letting the audience know that socially this is acceptable. So when the teachers decide, or the four main characters decide they're going to drink at school, that it's over the line of acceptability. But in this society, is it? You know what made me the most uncomfortable is when he's having a conversation with the kids about how much they drink. Oh, come on now. You drink more than 4 beers and how many? And the guy counts 32 or something like that. The young kid. That makes me uncomfortable. Unless you're in a conversation and you're teaching a class on alcoholism or sexuality or whatever it is, I'm very uncomfortable with an adult talking about certain subjects with children in classrooms. It just makes me uncomfortable. But in their society, and it dawned on me halfway through that scene, that's normal. That's probably a conversation the teachers had before with them.
I think he was obviously a little bit more open because he was drunk at the time. His blood alcohol content was high. I don't think he would have had that conversation with them if he wasn't affected in some way. But at the same time, you could say that by talking to those kids about it, so there's all of these, I mean, even in our society, there's a lot of these like unspoken things. It's like, oh, well, my child would never do that. Or, well, you know, I know they go out drinking, but just as long as they don't let me know that they know that I know. And it's this whole, like, there's this weird, like, fetishization of we're doing something under the radar. We're doing something, you know, clandestine, taboo.
Yeah.
And that is actually more interesting to someone than the thing that you're doing, whether it's drugs or whatever, you know, even sex, you know, because it's taboo, that adds more of that attraction to it. But if you take the stigma away from something like that, a negative stigma away from something like that, then having a beer is not a big deal because it's literally just liquid. Now, having too many beers is a totally different thing because it can affect you and it can affect other people around you and it can hurt people, it can hurt you. So there's a difference between the beer itself and the use of the beer. But when beer itself or whatever it is banned or is prohibited or whatever, then it gets this extra stigma to it that can be detrimental. But he was kind of breaking down those barriers. Maybe those kids would not want to drink as much.
Yeah, but that is also a very American way, from my point of view, of looking at it. Meaning I was being judgmental from a society where I was raised where, well, I was 18 when I was younger and then they changed it. And I was grandfathered in, by the way. Every drinker I knew would have loved that. I could care less.
I thought there was prohibition when you were a kid.
Funny. No, that was funny. That was funny. It was quite a while ago. The grandfather clause and me being 18 and it changing to 21 should date me enough. Yeah. But when he was having that conversation, I was uncomfortable because of the society I was raised in. But I had to take a step back and say, I don't necessarily agree with you that because he was lit up or he had been drinking, he felt more comfortable. I think he would have had that conversation if he was still on the same level as a teacher he had become after he came to school a little intoxicated. He became a better teacher. And I also knew that wasn't going to last long. But so when you jump later on in the film and the young kid is having anxiety about his exams, and that guy, talk about the performances in this movie. That young kid nailed it. That young kid is on point. That young kid should be proud of himself that he pulled it off, because he had it hard. He had a hard position. You don't know anything about that kid. He jumps in and you fully understand where he's coming from. You got a name?
His name is Albert Rudbeck Lindhard.
Sure. Yeah, I did look his name up. I'm so glad you got to say that, not me. But yeah, so major props to that young guy, because he did his job. No small actors, only small parts. But when the teacher is in the conversation and he's trying to soothe the kid, he's trying to tell the kid, hey, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. And I'm like, don't do it. Don't do it. Because I might have been Americanly judgmental in that classroom scene, but I know that this is not an appropriate conversation. That I know that no matter what society you live in and no matter what the age is, this is not a conversation you have one-on-one in a classroom privately with a student. You cannot do it. And he does it anyway. And so that's what's perplexing about this film for me, is that, was it okay for him to say that? Because his solution worked to the point where he does it in front of him. Have another sip of water.
Do the ends justify the means? That's what it comes down to. Yeah.
That's where the moral dilemma fluctuates for me, because it worked. And now that kid gets to go on to university or to wherever he needs to go, because he says, I'm going to be held back again. So how far does a teacher go? There was a movie back in the Stone Ages, according to you, called Teachers, with Nick Nolte and Jo Beth Williams. And he takes a young girl to get an abortion. And that was, of course, it is very controversial. As well it should be. But if not him, then who? For me personally, I would never put myself in that position. I'm not making a statement about what she does or what he does. I'm not judging them. For me personally, I don't think that's an appropriate line to cross. Regardless, I don't think you should take a young person who's not your child to a medical procedure, regardless of what the medical procedure is. But it does beg the question, if a teacher sees a young person more than their parents do the majority of the day, the majority of the year, who is supposed to give that person advice? And if a parent gave that student or their child that advice, would that be okay? So is it the advice or is it the person giving the advice? And I think this movie is riddled with those questions, and that's a good thing.
So another one of those mirror kind of scenes was how he's like hesitant to drink at the beginning around the table with everybody. And he's like, no, I just got water, I'm driving. And then later on in the film, when they're starting their binge drinking stuff, he kind of waits and then he watches them. That's another scene actually that is very well shot. The way that they do the generation of the cocktails is very meticulous and has all these little special things. Oh, we got to cut the orange peel and we got to rub it around the edge of the glass, and we got to use the nice spherical ice cube, and you got to muddle the sugar. I mean, the way that it was shot, it was very enticing for Mads Mikkelsen. He was way far away, off in the distance, away from everybody else, and just drinking his water. And then, of course, right as he gets ready to leave, he's like, well, maybe I'll try it. And so that's very similar to the beginning scene where he's like, no, I'm not going to drink. And then it's like, well, this is amazing vodka from such and such. He skips the first drink and then they do the vodka. And then after that, they're doing other stuff, other mixed drinks,
right,
and champagne and all that stuff. So,
well, there's another popping of champagne
wine.
Later on.
It was red wine that he just kind of downs it, and then the really expensive red wine that he downs, and then he starts to tear up, and then he starts to drink the second one, and they're like, what's going on? That was rough.
BAFTA nominee. That's the reason why he's being celebrated for his acting, because he's amazing in this. He pulls it out, man.
He has to be like really happy, really excited. He's with his family canoeing, amazing. And then, he reconnects with his wife, and then he has to find out that his wife cheated on him. And then he has to, it's all of this stuff all wrapped up, and it's got to be tough to go through each of those phases.
That also parallels a lot of the emotional journey that we're going through, that your mirror idea is reflected in that also, because you're sitting there watching her judge him for becoming a minor alcoholic teetering into irresponsible, talking about how he disappeared and where have you been? And you're like, you're right. Why are you doing this? You just told your son that you have been drinking and that you're drunk all the time. The kids always know. And then in the middle of that scene, he goes, well, where have you been? And you're like, oh, we're sitting here judging you without all of the information, because where has she been, of course, means you're cheating on me. And so you're not expecting that. You're not expecting her to be as flawed at all, because it's not about her. The movie's not about her. The movie's about him. And so when that happens, you're like, oh, wait. So who do I sit in judgment more?
Yeah. Well, and there's a little bit of
the minor alcoholic or the cheater.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of a hint screenplay wise, because she's like, oh well, I got to go in earlier, I got to stay late, or those types of things.
I never saw it,
and she was very aloof, like right from the very beginning. She's just kind of like, what? Oh, I'm going. You're leaving. I'm staying.
No, it's obviously there because that's what he says. He says something about you're always going in early or you're always staying late. Yeah. Really, he says that in that scene. In the reveal, if you will. But I have a tendency to take people for their word. I had no idea that was going to be revealed later on. None. I didn't even suspect it. In a way, I'm kind of glad, because I'm on her side, and I'm kind of still on her side even after that scene.
Her argument was that, like, you left before I did. Both people have to take the credit / blame for each of their actions.
Right. But which is worse? Telling a kid to drink during an exam or not telling him and letting him fail? Getting a little drunk in class and having a great conversation with kids and they say it, they're going to remember you forever. You're immortal to them, which is true. And then having a conversation about how much they drink. Like, where is the line being drawn? So is it wrong for him to have left mentally and spiritually, emotionally left the relationship? So does that make it okay for her to cheat? Because she says, well, what did you want me to do? Wait for you? And he's like, yes.
Kinda.
Yes. Yeah, that's this deal here.
That's the agreement, but okay.
But you're going, do you wait? Is somebody supposed to wait after this long of a marriage, after this living together? Like, I don't have a steady relationship, so I can't look at it from that point of view at this time in my life. Thank God. But, where does the line get drawn? Is she emotionally wrong for what she did? Or is he emotionally wrong for, not wrong, but
I know what you're saying. Like
you're evaluating where you are morally, meaning where I am morally.
It's way more complex than that. Yeah. It's not a, and
absolutely.
It's the same, like you said, these are the questions that are being brought up. And I don't think Thomas Vinterberg is trying to answer questions. He's trying to face us with questions. And we haven't really talked about the coach very much. But where does that character fit within all of this? Like, when they talk about how different blood alcohol content levels affect people differently, is he one of the representations of this kind of sent him down a spiral into a place where he was not able to come back up out of?
Well, I think he has an accident. That's why he couldn't come back out of it. He has an accident. And by the way, the picture on IMDb reveals way too much in the film, because now that we're getting closer to it, it's a picture of Mads and he's wearing an all black suit. And I was like, why is he wearing an all black suit? Is he going to a funeral in this? And so when you get set up for the soccer coaches, I was like, yep, he's going to a funeral. This is going to crush me. So he didn't have a chance to come out of it, because you remember the scene before that when he brings him home when he's too intoxicated, and then he cleans up and he's passed out, and then he wakes up and he's like, oh, you cleaned up? Thank you. And he's like, oh, let's celebrate. And he's like, I don't know. And then he unconsciously goes to the refrigerator and he goes, calm down, take it easy. Take it easy. And he's like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm reaching for a beer because that's what I know. So he understood he needed to control that. And he uses the rationalization of, oh yeah, the thing at school, that was wrong. It'll never happen again. I've got control over it, which is what everybody says. And all four of them lose control at some point, to the point where drinking is devastating. The chorus teacher, he gets so drunk in that store looking for fresh cod. I'm sorry, I laughed. And then destroys it, and really kind of is like, gives that guy a hard time, who is an innocent person trying to just work his job. I mean, so they all have had incidences that cause pain to somebody else because of their drunkenness. But do I think any of them were alcoholics and couldn't recover? No, I don't. I think they were drunkards and they knew the difference. And I think that the soccer coach just had an accident. And unfortunately, I think the dog is pure indication of what's going to happen to that character, because the dog is old and at a place that nobody can do anything but help take out to go to the bathroom. and just love on him, but it's incapacitated. And I think emotionally that character's incapacitated. And it's soul crushing because there's your thing about mirror. Everybody has something that they've done wrong from being a drunkard, but everybody is also doing something really special because of this theory of drinking during the day or drinking in places where you're not supposed to be, because that young boy who's on that soccer team will remember that coach. Yeah, he's so great. Such a sweet kid. And just the fact that he shows that shot of the soccer coach with his arm around the kid as the rest of the kids go to play, it shows that that guy's got a deep heart and that's what that kid needed at this time. He didn't need to be a soccer hero at that moment or practice or be good on the field right then. He needed the support of an adult to say, you're cool, dude. You're just a little dude who just doesn't play soccer well. No big deal. Stand here with me. It's okay. We'll stand here and we'll watch everybody else. And then when the little kid does well in the soccer game, it's because of that moment. He was able to rise above it. And then it's soul crushing and it's a little melodramatic.
When they
but
sing.
I think, well, it's the flower and the little boy walking towards the coffin with the flower. It's a bit melodramatic, but when you see the little kid in the funeral, I was like, oh, get set up because that little kid's coming back for this scene. Like I knew it. And my heart sunk a little bit. And so in a way, if he had left those scenes out, if he had left the singing scene out, because here's what's important about them singing. The little boy starts the song.
Yeah.
So it wasn't premeditated. He started and his buddies rose to his occasion. They rose to what his expectations were. And he was trying the whole entire film to rise to their expectations as soccer players, but he couldn't do it because he's just not naturally talented that way. And so that's the reason why I think it borderlines melodramatic, but I think it works. And I think it's a good choice. Borderline cheeseball, but I'm good with cheeseball.
Okay, speaking of borderline cheeseball, what about the end scene when Mads Mikkelsen decides to just dance his heart out?
Before that, let's tap into the last scene with the wife and him back at that dinner, back at that restaurant.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just tap into that for just a split second, because here's what I'm talking about. Here's why I think this movie should be celebrated, especially this year, meaning in the Oscars and everything like that, because you're going back and forth between what you think is right, what you would do, what your moral code is, whether or not you should take a kid and allow them to drink. You're going back and forth. She's there to tell him, I don't want to talk about any of this stuff with our relationship. This is about our son and about this birthday party. She immediately orders a glass of wine, and then she lives for drinking that glass of wine during that scene. And that's why the choices that the director makes that are simple are important. When I was talking about earlier on in the podcast, where you know exactly what you're supposed to be looking at because he directs you to exactly what you need to know. When that glass of wine gets poured, you know you're supposed to be going, well, for me, is she going to criticize him for being a drunk? Why she's slamming a glass of wine the whole entire time? She is swallowing her emotions that whole entire scene by viciously drinking that wine. And then she gulps it down at the end. So wait a second, you just drank a whole glass of wine. So technically speaking, you're probably not okay to drive. So did you get a taxi here or are you going out to drive? And wait a second, are you judging him for being a drunk with an experiment that he chose to do and his life falls apart, but your life was falling apart anyway? And I think that's when the movie solidified for me. All of these problems were happening anyway. Every single thing that comes to the light, every problem was emphasized because of their drinking, but they were already there. The chorus teacher was sad that he wasn't in a long-term relationship and he didn't have kids and that's what he wanted. But was drinking going to solve that for him? No, it was going to make it a little bit easier. You know, there's obviously relationship issues with the couple, you know, and there's obviously raising children issues with the other couple, Nicola, and the loneliness. What's the soccer coach's name?
I think it's like Tomas.
I know his character's name is Tommy and his name is Thomas Bo Larson. And he's one of the reused actors. That sounds weird. I used that actor. Like, he's no longer good. I've used them all up. He is a reoccurring cast member in this director's filmmaking. Loneliness is always going to be his thing. He's alone. And so is drinking going to solve that? No, but these problems would have existed. So that last scene between the wife and the husband is not only good writing, because that comes up later on when he says, I miss you. And that's when she gulps that down. I'm done. I'm out. So she's soothing her own pain with the exact same thing that she's criticizing him for messing up his life. And I thought that was daunting and I thought that was beautiful. And I was like, and that actress is brilliant. What's her name?
Maria Bonavie.
Yeah, that's her. She's brilliant in this. Anika. And In any other year, if she had just another little scene, she might have been talked about in this Oscar race. Not that that's important, because she did her job in this movie too. And I think that goes back to the little kid and the four main actors and all the children that are in the film. They all do what they were asked to do. And that's hard sometimes. There's always somebody who just misses the mark or is miscast or something. Not in this.
I think you're right in that this exercise is a clarifying exercise where it kind of buoys all of the issues that were underneath the surface. It brings them up above the surface. And I don't think that those guys were necessarily trying to make that happen. Obviously, best laid plans of mice and men and all that, where they're like, this is going to make us the best version of ourselves. But ultimately, it just confronted them with their real selves. Yeah, that scene was a small scene, but you're right. It does set up things for later on. And it's a nice, tight little package that's waiting to be unwrapped by the end of the film, which it's a weird kind of like they're commiserating with each other, they're remembering their friend, and then he gets this like really great information. And then to kind of help that, the kids come through and he's able to kind of like put all the pieces together and then actually emote in the way that he wants to. And we get that. That's another kind of mirror payoff. Him dancing has been set up the whole film.
Yeah, and he's the only one who doesn't dance until that moment. And they talk about how he used to be a professional or was on the highway to becoming a professional dancer and then changed course.
And Mads Mikkelsen was a professional dancer for about 10 years.
Right.
Before he's decided to start acting. So he was able to, I guess, dust off some of his dancing skills. It seemed a little corny to me too, but he was definitely having fun. I'm sure there were some moves in there, there were definitely moves in there that I couldn't do, but yeah, it seemed like he was having a lot of fun.
Well, he's a year older than me, so I can appreciate it from that point of view, because I don't know if I could move without a lot of working out beforehand. And here's what made it not corny for me. Because his moves are so specific and obviously choreographed on some level, but seem natural. And the fact that his character was once a dancer and used to dance and never has danced all the way through this film. And the fact that he's in such a good place now that he can dance and let it go. I think it was appropriate. And I think it was the feel-good ending to a movie. And we needed a feel-good ending. We didn't need to watch Nicolas Cage drink himself to death. Although that's the only choice that I think that character could have made in Leaving Las Vegas.
Spoiler alert, jeez.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Sorry. Well, I mean, 1995, dude. Catch up. Yeah, no, sorry. I mean, that's what he says he's going to do. I mean, he goes to Vegas to drink himself to death, allegedly. Is that better? Sure. But that made sense to me as that story ending for that character in Leaving Las Vegas. This made sense to me because in the middle of the film, when the chorus director jumps in and crosses the water as they're fishing for real cod, because the wife wants fresh cod, Martin would have been the last person, even intoxicated, to jump in that water. So the fact that he dances for the first time in forever and then jumps into the water, which is the craziest thing you could do in front of your ex-students, I thought it was kind of brilliant. I think it's the ending we deserved, because the movie is not daunting. It's not heavy. It does have its moments where it's like, please survive this. And some do and some don't. So it has a joyous aspect to the film throughout the whole entire movie. So to end it on something other than I Miss You Too, and then him dancing and jumping in, I got the point of the moral seesaw that you made us analyze everything through. We've talked about it already. I need for you to get off of the seesaw without breaking a collarbone. I need for it to stop and you be able to get off of it at the end of this movie, because there's something you want these characters to be successful. And you in particular want Martin to be successful. And the dance says that he is. And so I'm good with that. I was good.
That's great. That's a great place to end it too. All right. You can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer. You can tweet us at actorengineer, and you can find us on YouTube. Just search for the Actor and the Engineer podcast, and we'll see you next time.